Hello and welcome to Politics Today. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. Today we are going to talk about geopolitics, and we are not going to talk about Pakistan. We are going to talk about Afghanistan, because the situation in Afghanistan, whatever it is, whatever it has been for past 20 years, now, despite that, the US president has decided that by September 11, American forces and NATO forces are going to pull out of Afghanistan. And this withdrawal comes at a time which is a slight extension of the earlier promised, withdrawal deadline that was May 1st. Not only that, we have seen that rigorous efforts are continuing to engage in peace talks. We know because of this slight delay, Afghan Taliban have been backtracking from their position, but it seems that one of the reasons why this date was announced was to bring them back to the discussion table. Having said that, when you talk about this moment, it seems to be a bittersweet moment. Sweet perhaps because any war theater finally has to close down, but bitter because the project of nation building or democracy building in Afghanistan seems to be far from over. Despite that, we have seen that responses have been mixed and mostly positive, with the exception perhaps of Lindsey Graham, the senator, who has been a hawk on Afghanistan. His language was astounding. He called it a decision dumber than dirt, and then called it devilishly bad decision as well. We are going to talk about what is possible, what might happen in view of this timeline. But before that, our team has actually, prepared a clip from President Biden's speech. First watch that, then we are going to discuss everything.
I'm now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a fifth. After consulting closely with our allies and partners, with our military leaders and intelligence personnel, with our diplomats and our development experts, with the Congress and the Vice President, as well as with Mr. Ghani and many others around the world, I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
Right. This was basically the clip where he makes the point. And we know that 4 presidents, President Biden is the 4th president under whose time this stay has been going on. Now he says that he is not going to pass the buck to a 5th. We are going to talk about all these matters. In order to help us understand these issues, I'm joined by a panel, one analyst in the studio, 2 on Skype. In the studio, I have Dr. Syed Mohammad Ali, who is Director Strategic Affairs Center of Aerospace and Security Studies. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for being part of the program. On Skype, I'm joined by Ambassador Asif Tutani, a career diplomat and an expert on these issues. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. And quite interestingly, we have 2 namesakes in today's program. The other guest who joins us from Georgetown University, America, is Dr. Syed Mohammad Ali, who's an adjunct professor. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program as well. Let me start with the studio, and let me ask, and by the way, I'm going to call you doctor, and I'm going to call him professor, so that we don't confuse names. Dr. Ali, let me ask you about the timeline. What do you think and how it is going?
Thank you so much for inviting me to your show and discussing a very important topic. I think President Biden's announcement is historic, bold and significant, but it has 3 contexts which will help us understand why he has decided and announced what he has announced and decided. Number 1, there is a domestic political aspect which you also mentioned in your introduction. He had this as part of his election manifesto, that he'll end Afghan war. And secondly, a very interesting dynamic which has emerged in the early part of his presidency is that the State Department is trying to take the lead and recover from the dominant influence of Pentagon in terms of U.S. defense policy. So what is going on essentially is that U.S. foreign policy and diplomacy is trying to recover from the excessive use of U.S. hard power. So in that context, despite the Pentagon and senior military officers advise that U.S. should maintain some military presence, some boots in Afghanistan, I think the advisors in the National Security Council and State Department have prevailed upon Mr. Biden.
There was a Politico article on this matter as well, which was quite controversial. I'm going to come back to you, sir. Allow me to actually bring in the other guest, Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab. How realistic is this timeline? We know that Afghanistan has seen a significant regression repeatedly, and this time it seems that there are predictions that once again there will be a civil war, and there is a possibility that once again Afghanistan might become a haven for bad actors. So your take?
I think it was on grounds because Biden administration from the very beginning they wanted to have some time, and it is just hardly 3 months that the Biden administration is in place, and at the same time there are in the impasse which is still nowhere.
Okay. Right. Ambassador Saab, your voice seems to be breaking up. Right. Ambassador Saab, let me add a question here. Perhaps the signal will recover by then. Taliban don't seem to be playing ball right now. Are you confident that the Taliban are going to come back to the negotiation table?
I think they will. If they are in the game, then they'll try. But if they think that they can go for the military solution, they can offer that, but again they'll isolate them. At the moment, they have some kind of, whether it is in Iran, China, Russia, Pakistan, so they have been accepted as a stakeholder. Americans have accepted Taliban as a stakeholder. So are other actors who have been involved in Afghanistan. They have accepted Taliban as a stakeholder. So in that respect, I think Taliban will have to take care of those sensitivities, which in fact then bring them to the mainstream. Otherwise, if they want to be like any militia, then in that case, I think they may continue to be a nuisance, but they won't be able to rule, or their rule would not enjoy any legitimacy. So this is what is important. And secondly, what Taliban, if they think that they are the government in waiting, then in that case, again, they will have to show their cards, what kind of a government that is going to be. So again, when you look at President Biden's statement, in that case, he is still supporting the Afghan government. But here lies the catch, that if U.S. thinks that they would still continue with the kind of support they have been giving to Ashraf Ghani, then they are contradicting themselves, because in the same statement they say that their presence, troop presence in any situation would not be construed as a bargaining chip, which is the case right now with the Ashraf Ghani government, because they think that American presence in Afghanistan is a bargaining chip. So here,
Ambassador, that is a very important point. Let me bring in Professor Mohammad Ali joining us from the U.S. Professor Saab, let me ask you, in the speech, at least to me it seemed that the onus seems to be on Pakistan, a lot of onus on Pakistan, Do you think that this impression is true? And if so, the whole peace process, is it once again going to become some form of, transform into some form of do more mantra, as we have seen in the past 20 years?
Well, Pakistan will certainly be under pressure, and pressure on 2 points. Essentially, to try and cajole the Taliban, to not.
Okay.
In
terms of
for the U.S., it's also logistical.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir. You'll have to repeat the last 2 sentences because there was some problem with the audio. Please go ahead.
Right. So it will be under pressure on these 2 points. Trying to ensure that the Taliban don't leave the peace negotiations, and also that the uptake in violence, because there has been selective, targeted violence going on throughout after the Trump deal, but there will also be pressure that if the NATO forces and the US forces come in the crosshairs, then it will be increasingly difficult even to stick to the September 11 deadline. So these will be the 2 pressure points directly exerted on Pakistan.
Right. Professor Ali, let me ask you another very important question. Some 46% of Afghanistan's population is under 15 years old. That means that this is the generation that was born after 9/11, after the US occupation. And it kind of implies that there have been pockets of stability in Afghanistan, and that's why there are people who might have actually felt comfortable to bring more people into the world. On the other side, we have seen that women and their rights were quite significant in the past 20 years. Now, if the US leaves, this question becomes big. What do you think is going to happen to the Afghan constitution and people's rights after September 11?
I mean, that's a really complicated issue, and there's often morality and human rights when it comes to real politics, right? I mean, there's geostrategic posturing around that. So even when it came to coming after the Taliban for harboring Al-Qaeda post 9/11, the reason for the just war created here in the US and for staying so long was that we are also helping Afghan women, and post-colonial scholars in particular have a term for this, right? And they've seen this again and again, this phenomena of saving brown women from brown men, right? So it's not to say that the Taliban weren't quite brutal in their suppression of civil rights, right? But I mean, if one looks at the entire quantum of resources spent in Afghanistan, what's been spent on women and girls, empowerment projects, or schooling is just a very thin sliver of that amount. In fact, there's a range of issues that still are left pending. I mean, be it economic stabilization, be it water sharing arrangements of Afghanistan with its neighbors, which haven't, because the focus has been on counter-terrorism, right? And I mean, that's been a problem which has persisted for the past 2 decades.
Right. Right, and that actually, you have rightly pointed out many problems that still are faced by the Afghan state. But the question still remains, and let me ask Dr. Ali, the future of Afghan constitution. Of course, it is a constitution that was born out of consensus and actually believes in equal rights for all. So what happens when any kind of deal actually concludes?
It's a very important question, and I'll respond to this in the context of the 2 most significant responses which have come after President Biden's historic announcement. Yeah. The response by the Pakistani Foreign Office and the response by the Afghan Taliban. Okay. And the answer to your question lies somewhere in the middle. What is significant about Pakistan's Foreign Office response is that there is an emphasis of responsible drawdown, but there is no reference to the Doha Agreement, which indicates that Pakistan is also looking at this situation as fluid and keeping its options open. But we are showing
what are the options?
Basically we are committed to the process, but not identifying any specifics to sort of constrain progress. But let's come to the more interesting response, which is from the Afghan Taliban. The response is extensive, but it has 3 key points. Number one, they have commented on the US President's announcement as a recognition by the US administration that a war is not a solution to Afghan problem, number one. The second most interesting part of their response is that the 9/11 to 2021 drawdown date or departure date represents a violation of the Doha Agreement. They have said that. And number 3, that between today, this announcement by Mr. Biden and 9/11/2021, whatever happens and goes wrong, the onus and the responsibility of the consequences will unilaterally lie on the US, because they have decided to violate the agreement based on their administrative and logistical conveniences.
And how does this response actually reflect on the future of Afghan state and constitution?
Very, very important. And the last point in their response is that the Afghan Taliban remain committed to their ideology, and they have not mentioned in any public statement anywhere ever regarding their recognition, their desire to recognize the political system, the constitution, or the current government in Kabul. So that means...
Was it not part of the Doha Agreement though?
No, because from the Afghan Taliban perspective, the Doha Agreement is a bilateral agreement between Afghan Taliban and US administration. And they do not recognize the Kabul administration.
No, but there are 3 major points, and they actually focus on the framework as well.
Absolutely, and that is the spanner, that is the catch, because that is why Mr. Blinken called Pakistan Army Chief. That is why perhaps today, as we speak, a call will be made between Prime Minister Imran Khan and President Erdogan, because number of capitals are trying to bring Afghan Taliban to Istanbul process, which they are reluctant, because they see when they sit eye to eye with Ashraf Ghani's administration, that will tantamount to recognizing them politically, which they have stopped short of doing.
But this whole thing was called intra-Afghan dialogue, the next stage was, and because of that, of course, Ashraf Ghani, regardless of Taliban actually acknowledge or not Afghan government, they wouldn't recognize that they are actually one of the groups in Afghanistan. Ambassador Dutani, when you are looking at this situation, let me ask you, is there a chance that Taliban can be actually brought to the table in a way that they recognize whatever humanitarian accomplishments that we have seen so far?
They should, and there is a likelihood that it will happen, because already talks are on, and that's why the Biden administration has kept their extension period small. It's almost 3 months and a few days more. So it is quite a possibility that before the Istanbul dialogue commences, Taliban would agree to that, because if they display in Afghanistan, to which they claim that they...
Then in that case, and that too when the Americans are withdrawing from Afghanistan, their attitude of not joining the dialogue would be reflected negatively. And I think it will have far more negative consequences for the Taliban as a stakeholder than any other party.
will want you to actually dilate upon that point, because a counter argument is that by drawing a deadline, by actually giving a deadline, the US has given the Afghan Taliban an opportunity to actually wait out the withdrawal, and after that they can actually swarm the whole system and take over once again. So this is an argument that repeatedly I've seen Western pundits actually articulating on Western media, sir.
These things are being talked about, but the question, main question is that if Taliban had agreed in Doha last year with the Americans, so they have acted upon their commitment and have not attacked American troops and NATO troops. And that has given dividends in a sense that their 5,000 prisoners were released, although those were kept by the Ashraf Ghani government, which was not part of the agreement. So in that respect, they should be aware of the fact that now they are entering into a diplomatic arena where they have to play by the rules. Otherwise, they cannot be an island, and they cannot, live by themselves. It has not happened. They did try earlier from 1996 to 2001, and then they were thrown out. So the rest is history. So yes, they did launch a struggle, but at the same time, they have to display a responsible attitude. And as Dr. Ali was referring to, the Foreign Office's reaction with regard to American withdrawal, it has to be a responsible withdrawal, because we already have an example that the Soviet troops withdrew from Afghanistan. Of course, there was a period of 1 year, and in that period, those Mujahideen parties, they could not agree to an interim government. The result was what? Even if they did agree, they did agree grudgingly, and the result was what? It plunged the country into a civil war. So here again, the situation could be repeated. So this, I think Taliban and the Ashraf Ghani government should realize that it is they who have to bring peace, not the outsiders.
Right. Ambassador, that is a good point. Although you said that they could not agree during that time, I distinctly remember that the then Prime Minister of Pakistan flew all warring parties to Makkah, where sitting next to Khana Kaaba, they actually agreed on certain points, and that they are not going to fight among themselves. And then they came back and started fighting again. So that actually shows you the quality of agreements between these parties too. Let me go back to Professor Ali. Professor Ali, you must be listening to what was being said. You can respond to any point that was made earlier. But here's another very important issue. We are sitting in Pakistan, and we have seen that this country has been fighting terrorism for past 20 years. We have lost more than 80,000 people. There is said to be a possibility that if in Afghanistan peace breaks down after the withdrawal, there can be safe havens for people who might be radical enough that they might actually launch attacks in Pakistan. Do you see that possibility? And if so, what is the countermeasure that Pakistan should be adopting at this moment?
I mean, sure, that's a possibility, and we've seen, on both sides of the Durand line, deep problems, with the factionalization and then the subsequent morphing of the TTP on this side, and who knows what imperatives unfold in subsequent, if chaos returns to Afghanistan and continues spiraling out of control. And one other major problem, which of course we've also experienced firsthand, is the refugee problem, right? I mean that it's been a long-standing burden, already creating misery for the Afghans who come across the borders, and creating a burden on a state which doesn't have the resources available to adequately look after this population. I mean, still, figures fluctuate, but we still have at least a couple of million, maybe 3 or 4, and that number could, again, we could see a spike in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know, I mean, those are two serious issues for
Right.
Pakistan directly.
So what is the solution, sir?
I mean, the solution is, unfortunately, I mean, it needs a long game. And, you know, when it comes to geostrategic, handlings of situations, I mean, there are two ways of thinking about, security. One is a more human-centric notion, and the other is a more traditional, hard-nosed security perspective. And the kind of world we live in, unfortunately, those conventional forms of security, I mean, be it Pakistan, be it the US, those always trump human security considerations. So, I mean, one would have wished that, you know, of all the resources spent in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, more attention had been paid. I mean, yes, the constitution was created for Afghanistan, but I mean, you know, what consultations took place for that, for the Bonn conference, in the creation of a governance mechanism. If at that time, you know, there was some semblance of listening to all sides, we might not have seen this long, drawn out, resistance, by the neo-Taliban. Over the past 20 years. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you know, pressing problems around the Kabul River with the melting of the Himalayan Hindu Kush range, I mean, that's a very serious problem. And Afghanistan, with none of the Central Asian states, or with Pakistan, has any water sharing arrangement. On the Helmand, it had from the 70s, it had brokered something with Iran, but that never came into effect. Right, and
Right.
I mean, we are increasingly seeing water
These are important points. Let me actually come back to the studio, Dr. Ali. Pakistan has been fencing its border with Afghanistan for quite some time, and it is going to complete very soon. Do you think that a hardened border can take care of the problem? The problem seems to be that there are divided families across the Durand line or the international border. And there might be some kind of ripple effect within Pakistan. We already, last 2 days have proven, we already have many problems to take care of.
Absolutely.
So what happens then? What is the solution?
A very important point. I think it's the border, our western border is a major challenge and has remained so since independence for different reasons.
Okay.
And obviously, my view is that fencing the border is a tactical solution to a strategic problem.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is that, as you rightly pointed out, I mean, there are divided families on both sides, and I don't know the numbers, but practically tens of thousands of people cross over every day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and the issue of smuggling, crimes, and other things is a daily issue, which unfortunately no government has been able to manage.
Right.
So it's a combination of bad governance and insecurity, which has been exploited by our adversaries.
Right.
And unfortunately, my modest view is that the emerging scenario in the coming months does not augur well for Pakistan, despite our best and sincere efforts.
Right.
Because
and you are
because
you are reinforcing the question, but I need an answer.
But
what is the solution?
I just want to make one point which will make this debate very interesting.
Yeah.
This announcement by President Biden ends to end the war for the US troops. It will not end the war in Afghanistan.
Okay.
The war in Afghanistan will enter a new stage when the US troops leave.
Right. So there is a possibility of a civil war.
Not just a possibility, I think it's almost imminent.
Okay.
Because whether, as Professor Ali pointed out, the primary issue is obviously, which is a short term and immediate, whether the US and Afghan Taliban will fight or not.
Yeah.
But in the long run, once the US leave, it seems like a foregone conclusion that Kabul
But
will
my
be
question
fought
still,
over.
My question still remains, and I'm going to actually go back to Ambassador Saab. Ambassador Saab, how can Pakistan protect itself if things go south in Afghanistan?
Pakistan protect itself by managing
the crisis.
I think we have been doing that for the past 4 decades. Of course, with different results at a different point of time. So this is going to happen. But the main focus should be a peace process in Afghanistan,
and which are the characters and the stakeholders they come into power in future Afghanistan, and that should be our focus. And related to those issues are that
Ambassador Sahib, I understand that it should be our focus, but there are many variables that one has to actually look at. We are going to actually try focusing on that as well. My concern primarily is that I am sitting in a country called Pakistan. So the first important thing for me is to defend myself, right? My own country. And then we can talk about another country. What are the concrete steps that the government of Pakistan can take at this moment to ensure that if, God forbid, something goes south in Afghanistan, it doesn't have a ripple effect inside Pakistan?
if you want to secure the borders, by all means secure it. That is the responsibility of any state. Like with India, you have secured your borders.
Yeah.
So with Afghanistan, if there is any spillover effect, you have to secure your borders, come what may. So I think it is quite simple as that. But at the same time, as you pointed out, that there are divided tribes on both sides. So those create problems on both sides of the border because you just cannot deny them access. It is under the agreement. So accessibility is there under the easement rights. So that happens. So this is as something a different relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is quite unique to Afghanistan and to Pakistan. Afghans, the kind of access they have in Pakistan, they don't enjoy that in the neighborhood. Certainly not with Iran or Uzbekistan, Tajikistan or China. So here I think we have to be very clear that this is the problem, we have to manage it. Even if the crisis lingers, we have to manage this problem, which we have been doing. I cannot give you a mathematical answer, reason being that the situation is complex, it is tribal, its topography is very difficult, and then the demography on both sides, almost they have identical features. So that will create problems. So you have to manage, and that is the solution. You have to manage the problem.
Regarding easement rights, what is the territorial range of the allowance of people actually visiting Pakistan? Is it
normally it is 60 kilometers, but that is never complied with, whether it is with Afghanistan or with the Iran and Balochistan. On both sides, it's almost 60 kilometers.
Right. Professor Ali, you have listened to the answer of others. Again, because I first brought this question to you. If you want to add, please do. But regarding another aspect, when you look at 43 years of Afghan war history, you see that there's been a tug of war between regional powers going on in the country. Do you think that after the departure of the U.S., this tug of war is going to end? If not, is there a possibility that every neighbor becomes selfish and they actually use Afghans against Afghans and each other?
Well, I mean, that's what's been happening, and you know, that's the tragedy of it. I mean, at some levels, I mean, Pakistan has managed this crisis well. So, I mean, for instance, they haven't allowed a merger of the TTP with the Taliban, which could have become a, unmanageable beast. But I think all players have been very Machiavellian in their approach, right? And that's a part of the problem. So we've seen unlikely alliances between India and Iran and the Northern Alliance. Blood has been spilled by all sides. And, even going forward, a hard border on something like the Durand line, which has this complicated, colonial legacy where the ethnicity has been divided on two sides. I mean, yes, border management is necessary. I mean, we don't live in a utopia. I mean, we live in a realistic world. But just barbed fencing, I mean, is that something that's the way forward? Right? I mean, when it comes to water sharing, I mean, Pakistan is very concerned with Indian efforts to help dam the Kabul River, which it feels is, another form of encirclement. But then, what efforts have been made to share data, to come up with more cooperative arrangements going forward? I mean, there was a plan for the ROZ, the Reconstruction Opportunity Zone, where Afghan and Pakistani goods would get preferential access to U.S. markets. And, it made some progress. It was even put before Congress, but, nothing subsequently came out of it. So now they are still in the region, there are opportunities for regional integration, right? I mean, even China, there's a possibility that China might offer Kabul to be looped into the BRI. But on the other side, it's not like the U.S. is very open to cooperation with China either, right? So there are possibilities which can enhance regional cooperation, but unfortunately, all the stakeholders seem to have a rather myopic approach, including Pakistan, where its foremost fear has been, that India is going to get a, greater, and there has been concern with cross-border, destabilization. And if we have these maximalist positions by regional players and, then a global sort of superpower like the U.S., we arrive at a state that we're at.
Right. And Professor Saab, earlier ambassadors have said that there isn't any mathematical answer. So that reminded me that the mathematics of it all, especially because you are talking about regional integration, actually is so confusing. Seldom 2 plus 2 seldom produces 4, it becomes 5, 6 or perhaps 3. And that is, just to qualify, on one side the US is praising China's and Russia's role in trying to build peace in Afghanistan. On the other side, they are sanctioning each other as well. So India and Pakistan might be trying to actually build peace among themselves, but when it comes to Afghanistan, they don't see eye to eye. Dr. Ali, the question right now is that we have been hearing a buzzword for quite some time, spoilers. And in spoilers, we heard 2 words, in Pakistan, India, and internationally, Daesh or ISK. Now, we are not hearing that much mention of ISK these days. What exactly has become of that? Is it that the US and the Afghan government have been able to degrade ISK to a level that it is no more a threat?
Unfortunately not. In fact, only a few days ago, you must have heard the news that Pakistan's counterterrorism forces killed 4 Daesh-linked terrorists in Balochistan. So they remain a real and present danger. And that is, like you earlier raised a very important question, is going to be the most important vital interest of Pakistan to ensure that when the Afghan situation escalates, after the US forces leave Afghanistan, it is very likely that,
let me point out for the audience, you are not using the word if, you are saying when it escalates.
Yes. So when the US forces leave Afghanistan, and despite our sincere, inclusive diplomatic efforts, Afghan Taliban attempt to convert their battle victories into political gain, it is quite likely that its consequences will be felt on our western border. So what do we have to do? And our and the spoilers in this region will definitely try to exploit it to our detriment. And we have threats from BLA, BLF, TTP, and now also Daesh as well. So it is very important now for Pakistani negotiators, including those who are involved in the background in facilitating the process leading up to the Istanbul dialogue, that Pakistan expects all stakeholders to ensure that the territory of Afghanistan is not used by any third party.
Right.
And whoever comes to power must ensure that Pakistan's support is conditional to the extent that it expects that this territory and soil will not be used against Pakistan.
And this is an assurance which is part of the Doha Agreement also, because it was actually one of the key aspects that Afghan soil will not be used against any other country.
And can I just add one small point? Thank you. Because I was in touch with the Uzbek government today, and today Prime Minister Imran Khan is going to speak to Erdogan, because we are trying to help the Istanbul process. So what does that mean? When we are talking to Turkey and Tashkent, we are talking to people who the Northern Alliance listen to.
Right.
So our help in facilitating Afghan Taliban to consider peaceful negotiation is also in return to our expectation that those powers who exercise influence over Northern Alliance and Kabul should also use their good offices to encourage them to consider peace.
Right, but with due respect, when you talk about Northern Alliance, I think even Pakistan and Northern Alliance before in 9/11, especially before 1993, used to have quite an equation, right?
Yes.
So they can listen to us as well. The humble submission is what becomes of Taliban, whether they listen or not. And the argument that the question that I was actually raising about Pakistan's self-preservation might actually make it sound like it was selfish argument. It is not. I'm a father of 2 girls, so I care deeply what becomes of Afghan girls. Afghan children and students actually often visit Pakistan, and I speak to them, and I see a lot of hope. So I never mean that we don't care about them, but first one has to look at what becomes of Pakistan's safety. Ambassador Saab, I'm told that we have to actually move towards concluding the program. Your conclusion, sir?
Well, again, it's a crucial stage. United States has announced its withdrawal, and for us, the challenges are that there are many paradoxes already in existence in Afghanistan. One paradox which United States is leaving behind would be that this territory, Taliban would not allow sanctuaries to Daesh and other terrorists. The question is, United States have been in Afghanistan for the past 2 decades, and if at all these Daesh, they took roots in Afghanistan, they took roots under the U.S. watch. So I think the United States will have to do some explaining on that aspect as well. And then second aspect, which is very important, we should not ignore, is that after leaving Afghanistan, Mr. Biden's main focus is China, because they want to enter into the competition, and then they want to build up a coalition against China. So we have to be mindful of the fact as far as regional peace and stability is concerned. And on that note, I leave it to you and your audiences to think about it.
Right. And you have given us a lot to think. Professor Dr. Ali, your conclusion, sir?
I feel that, yes, it is a precarious, dangerous situation, and it has evident security concerns. But alongside that, we have to, as they say in America, walk and chew gum at the same time. And we need to be thinking, and this is the right time for Pakistan to be thinking about the long game, right? Water and economics. And as CT negotiations, because we are instrumental in bringing the Taliban back and ensuring that there's some ongoing negotiation. So, while keeping an eye out on the power sharing formula that is being created, now is also a time to, turn it back to the US and say that is Afghanistan going to remain always dependent on donor aid or the opium economy? And if not, then it needs to work with regional partners. And that's something that India has been trying to do, but there hasn't been enough homework in Pakistan. And, to create those, economic opportunities where Pakistan helps.
Right. So I'm told that we have done short of time. Dr. Ali, very quickly, if you want to add, because I'm told that we have...
I'll just take 30 seconds. Just 2 points. One, this period is very important. We must try to convince Afghan Taliban that if the peace process fails, their opportunity to be recognized internationally and regionally will also be lost. And secondly, that if the war escalates further after the US departure, then that will convert the current three-front situation for Pakistan into a four-front situation.
Right.
The eastern border, the western border, the internal security, and the Indo-Pacific challenge.
Right. The internal aspect you are saying could be called the underground challenge as well. But sir, I'm told that we have to conclude the program. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Dr. Ali, Ambassador Tutani, and Professor Dr. Ali, thank you very much all for being part of the program. Viewers, you have listened to our participants. To me, the Afghan situation has always been about rights and economics. Without economics, no government can actually run, and that point was made by Professor Ali. But regarding Pakistan's self-preservation, one thing is clear. Pakistan committed to a 20-point national action plan that actually takes care of de-radicalization. If Pakistan keeps on adhering to that, hardened border or not, it will take care of the possibility of a ripple effect in Pakistan. The other thing regarding the US, everybody here keeps on criticizing America, but one has to be realistic. 20 years in another country, spending so much money and shedding so much of your own blood, there had to be some limit to it. And finally, we knew this moment was coming. This is today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.